God never looks at pain as failure. He never looks at error as failure. God never looks at your struggle and wrestle and your doubts as failure. All of it God sees as a preparation for something great. Welcome to this video. I'm outside out the back of my church. Some beautiful grevilleas here. The cross, representing Jesus Christ behind me. We thought we'd change it up a little bit for the second video in this little series looking at Joseph and does crisis actually have a purpose? In the first one we looked at the purpose of crisis being faith formation, that God uses difficulties to form our faith and to really put our reliance and our trust more fully in Him. And today we're going to look at the purpose of crisis, but look at the positive, look at the success that comes out of crisis. And we all know that often pain and a crisis or trouble leads to a place of breakthrough and often to success, and what we may call a success story for the person who survives the crisis and breaks through to a higher level in God, in life, in your career, whatever that is. I experienced a bunch of pain a few years ago when I had surgery, an old soccer injury. Both my groins had surgery on them. They cut away some muscle fibers and I was bruised. I was purple from my groins right down to my knees. But that pain allowed me to run, and I was pretty happy about that. It led to a breakthrough where I could run for the first time in about 3 years without pain. I had my strength return, and I was happy to go under the knife and endure the pain for the gain, if you like, that came after. And we know that. No pain, no gain. We know what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And this is an important principle of life that God uses to get His will done and to shape us and get us ready for the future. Talking about surgery, I love the fact of modern science and the way that that came and grew and accelerated out of the world wars. So in the First World War, you had very poor modern medicine, and in 1914, so a bit over 100 years ago, you've got the World War I begins, and the Western Front, the French are fighting, and within a few weeks you've got tens of thousands of soldiers who need surgical help. But medicine is not advanced and nothing like we know it today 100 years later. Actually, I was reading up a bit about this. That I read some history stuff, and they said that in those early weeks of the First World War, they would bring these French soldiers by horse and cart to a railway station. They'd put them in on the train where the cattle usually went. They'd lay them in the straw, and they would send these wounded soldiers off to the closest hospital in the nearest town, which could sometimes be very far away. They'd have no food, they'd have no water, no bandages. A lot of them would just bleed out. And in the first 6 weeks of the war, there was 300,000 French soldiers that were wounded. So shrapnel or a bullet went through their abdomen or something like that. And out of these 300,000 French soldiers, they had 20,000 of them were amputees. So they cut off a leg, cut off an arm. The main reason being that they hadn't really discovered antiseptic. So they, rather than dealing with the wound on the leg, the only really way to get around it and to heal this soldier so that he wouldn't die from infection was to just cut the leg off, because there was no antiseptic. But the crisis of the war obviously led to fast-paced medical advancement, and where once amputation was really the only solution, they quickly began to find ways of solving these problems. The first way was ambulances. So rather than the horse and cart, they began to use cars to transport wounded soldiers quickly. The other one was anesthesia, so actually being able to put a wounded soldier to sleep enough that they could do surgery on them. And of course, antiseptic was the invention or the solution that came out of this incredible crisis of World War I, a very sad moment in history, but it brought about a great breakthrough when they finally found sodium hypochlorite would kill off infection without actually burning away the skin. And as the new technology of war, so bombs and long-range artillery and all these new technologies that were helping us kill one another were expanding, medicine was forced through the crisis to have to keep up with the new technologies of war, and that have brought about many breakthroughs in modern medicine. And one of the ones that you'd be most happy about is antiseptic. You know, often in our lives we have these situations and we go through things, but we become a success story. And we love stories about people that have come from dire circumstances and break through to do great things. One I was reminded of as I was preparing was the story of Antoine Fisher, and he was a young black American man in the Navy. He's now a director and a producer and a writer and a very successful man, but he started in the Navy and he had all these issues with getting in fights. He had a massive anger problem, and rather than talk to someone, he would just bash him, and he was almost kicked out of the Navy, and he ended up with this black psychiatrist in the Navy to talk through some of his anger issues. And as he starts to deal with these anger issues, and for the first time in his life, he begins to share of the incredible pain and crisis and issues that he went through as a child. He was in foster homes, he was sexually abused, he was physically abused, his mother abandoned him and never claimed him, his father was murdered before he was even born, and he went through all this pain. And as he gets all this pain off his chest and begins to deal with these problems, work through all the crises of his childhood, all of a sudden he starts to become a new man. He starts to break through. He becomes a success story. And it's amazing. There's a movie about it. In 2003, Denzel Washington plays the psychiatrist. And it's amazing to see the psychiatrist play the role of the father that this young man, Antoine Fisher, never had, and meet him in his pain and in his crisis and help listen to him and walk him through to become a success story, eventually married and eventually wealthy, and an incredible story. We love those stories, but we have to embrace the reality that if there's no pain, there's no gain. What doesn't kill us only makes us stronger. And we particularly know this in the Christian life. In Hebrews 12 verse 11, it says that no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but afterwards, so the next step, later on, it produces a harvest of righteousness for those that have been trained by it. And we know this, that when we've got sin in our life, when we've got maybe a difficult upbringing, maybe there's things we've done to ourselves, we all have problems. We all go through crisis. Maybe someone's doing something to us. Maybe we're going through a difficult time in our local community, at work, something like that. There's pain. Why doesn't God just delete the pain? If God's a good father, why doesn't he just take away the pain? Why doesn't he just deal with our circumstances and solve the problem for us? Well, he doesn't, because we need to embrace the pain and become comfortable with suffering. He uses the pain because it exposes our heart and shows us where we're really at. Like the young man Antoine Fisher exposed, the pressure of the Navy exposed this angry man on the inside. But God uses this so we can deal with it. We've got to talk about our pain. And as we articulate our pain, we begin to embrace it as part of our story. And as we tell our story, there's where healing comes. We've got to journey through things, and we need to do it together with friends, with mentors, as a community. As we journey through our pain together and embrace it, part of the success is it binds us closer together. We have more intimacy in our marriage. As we get honest with our friends, then we're connected together stronger and deeper, and we learn to do life together, which is so important. The pain brings people together. The pain shapes your character. The pain gets you ready for a bigger breakthrough. The pain puts you in a position where later on you can help someone else or mentor someone else through their pain. The truth is, pain and crisis are often, usually, necessary in order to bring success. Most of the time, suffering and crisis will precede the breakthrough and the victory and the success. Now, we're looking at the life of Joseph as we look at crisis and does it have a purpose? We're in the coronavirus right now. It's a worldwide pandemic. Does this crisis have a purpose? There's always a purpose for those who are in God and have their faith set on him. Now, Joseph's story reflects this reality. Not only, we looked at last week a bit more at the negative and the crises and the difficult situations and what they produced in him, and that was faith. But what about the breakthroughs? What about where the crisis led to success for Joseph? I mean, he starts off, he has a charmed life in the beginning, a great childhood. He's the most favored out of the 11 brothers, the 11 sons. His father loves him the most. I mean, he seems pretty successful. He's having dreams and visions about the future. I mean, if I had $1 for every time I've met a young person that has great aspirations for the future, you know, Joseph had things set right. He had a great future ahead of him. He had huge potential. But then we know the crisis comes and he's sold into slavery. But you know what? The slavery leads to success in Potiphar's house. Not only does it lead to success in Potiphar's house as he becomes the head slave and runs the house, but we can see that God was actually positioning Joseph. Through the crisis of being sold into slavery, he positioned Joseph in Egypt, where he needed his man. He needed his child. He needed a man of God who was going to be ready in time in that place of Egypt to do a great work. So the crisis put him in the right place for success. In the prison, he rises up and becomes successful in the prison as the overseer of all the prison. Now you could look at the negative of that. I mean, he's in prison, he's stuck in a dungeon, but God uses him, and this is what connects him to the palace for the next breakthrough, the next leg of success in his journey. If he wasn't in the prison, he never meets the baker and the cupbearer. But in the prison, he meets the baker and the cupbearer. He interprets their dreams, which puts in the cupbearer's mind, right in the back of his mind, because he didn't remember Joseph for 2 years, that there's a man who can interpret dreams. Again, when the time is right, now he's connected to the palace. And when Pharaoh has a dreams, here's his next step of success. Here's the next breakthrough. He goes from the prison to the palace overnight, and he ends up before the greatest king in all the world, and he interprets his dream, another success. But we can look back, we can see that the dungeon, we can see that the being abandoned by his brothers, we can see that the accusations of Potiphar's wife, all these crises actually shaped and formed his character. So now he stands before Pharaoh and interprets his dreams. What a success! But there's only humility in Joseph. There's a broken man. There's not a man of pride or arrogance anymore. There's not a man with all these aspirations but no reality. There's not a young man who thinks he's going to change the world, but he doesn't believe in humbling himself before people. He's so full of pride. No, there's a man who's ready to do great things. And the next success follows quickly. He is made second in charge, second only to Pharaoh, in order to deal with the famine, the 7 years of plenty that would be followed by 7 years of famine. And he's the man who's put in that position to save many lives, a position of rulership, a position of honor, a position of overseeing. I mean, is this the ultimate success for Joseph? Is it the saving of many lives that's the ultimate success? Is it the breakthrough that he had in the dungeon when he was humbled and when he just put his trust in God? What was the greatest success that he has? I mean, Joseph's life is a life of toil and pain and crises, but it's also a life of success and breakthrough and level upon level, and higher he climbs and more influence. What is the real success in Joseph's story? Well, I'll tell you. The real success in Joseph's story is not one event or one position or one gift or talent that he had. It's not even the end point, the saving of many lives. Joseph's greatest success was that every crisis achieved its godly purpose in him and through him. And that's the challenge for us as followers of Jesus Christ. The greatest success that our life can have, the greatest success story in you and in me, is that God can have his will and his way in us and through us. In us because he has to prepare us as a vessel to do his great works. We have to be the right man for the right job in the right moment. And that takes years of molding and shaping and fashioning us. He has to get us ready inside so that he can work through us. If there's too much of us, God comes through us. If there's too much self-protection and pain and victim, and we're still stuck in not taking responsibility for our lives and not pushing forward and trusting God that all things are in his hands, then we block the flow of God. Then we're not the man that God can use. Then we get to the moment before Pharaoh and we're still full of pride, or we don't know what to say, or we don't know how to act because we were never trained in wisdom and character and all the things that God was trying to do through us. The greatest success is that you become the man or woman that God needs, that he can work in you and that he can work through you. As we bring this to a little bit of a close, I want to touch on three things, two sets of three things. The first is there's three threats to your success story. There's three things that I want to touch on that can threaten you becoming a success for God and having a great breakthrough for God. The first one is, why doesn't God stop this? It's that question. We all ask it when we're in a bit of pain, when we're in a crisis, when we're in the trenches, we're in that darkest moment. Why don't you just stop it, God? Why don't you just delete this crisis? Why don't you just cut away this cancerous, horrible situation? Why don't you just take me out of it? It's this question, and we can get the danger here, the threat here, is we become disillusioned. Become disillusioned with God. We become resentful at him and therefore at people around him. We become resentful at people who follow him, who represent him. We become resentful at everything that is to do with God because he didn't take us out of the problem. That's the first threat to your success story. The second one is to think that my crisis is unique. I see people stumble in this all the time. Again, it's a temptation that we all have to overcome. My crisis, my problem, this difficulty I'm going through, it's so unique. No one would understand. No one knows how difficult it for me is. And we begin to embody our story. We begin to take on, this is so painful. I'm totally misunderstood. The entire world misunderstands me. God doesn't even understand what's going on for me. We think our problems are unique. We think our issues are different from everyone else. We think our struggles are struggles that no human has been through in all of human history. And therefore we embrace and we embody and we take on the story of the victim. We miss the breakthrough. We miss the success that's just around the corner. The third threat is that we check out of the crisis early. And this pains me so much when I journey with people, pastor people, see people in my own congregation. There's a crisis and they've got faith and they're working through it. But then all of a sudden they check out. They check out because it's uncomfortable. They get out because they don't want to be in that position anymore. So they leave, they depart, they leave the church, they move into state, they get rid of, they get a new wife, they change their job, thinking that getting out, checking out, departing, leaving is somehow going to solve the crisis. It never does. If you move to another country, you can move to the other side of the world, you will take your problems with you and you'll miss the purpose of the crisis. You'll miss the success. The grass is never greener on the other side, and success is always just around the corner. Don't pull out prematurely before God has done his work in you. You can compromise the call, you can compromise the purpose just because you couldn't handle a little bit more of uncomfortability. Rather than deal with the uncomfortability, put your faith in God and he will carry you through. Let God's will, not your own will, bring an end to the crisis. That's the challenge. This is the fruit of the Spirit called long suffering. Suffer, trusting God that he will bring an end to the crisis when his work is done. Don't let your will bring an end to the crisis and it's finished prematurely and you miss the success story that God was building around you. The next three dangers that I want to talk about are three dangers of your success story. When you become successful, these are three dangers, because often we talk about pain and suffering as the problem, but I think that success can even be a greater problem. Some people wish they had more success. Sometimes I hope that people don't get what they wish for, because success can actually often take us further away from God. The first one is, I did it. You get a breakthrough, you're a success, you get out of the normal slavery and you become the head of the home. You become the chief slave in Potiphar's home and you think, I've made it. I've pushed through. My brother sold me, but look, yeah, maybe I'm a slave, but I've risen to this position of power and authority. This is a great danger, because you can forget God here. If Joseph had forgotten God there, if Joseph had stopped there and thought, well, I've made something of this difficult circumstance, I've become a self-made man, I'm the best slave in all of Egypt, he would have missed the bigger picture and what God was really trying to do. The second danger is that we get distracted by success. God has a purpose in success. He puts us in a position. He gives us a message. He takes us to a certain place to do something for Him. But the success brings distraction. We miss the whole purpose of the crisis we're in, and now we're just infatuated with the success that we've come to, the place that we've come to, the people we're connected to, whatever that may be. This is why the Lord's Prayer says, lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from the evil one. Because once we get going, sometimes we fall into temptation. Once we make it somewhere, sometimes we forget and we get led. We get carried away by the riches and the glory of our success, and we miss the purpose of what God was trying to do. Always remember where you've come from. Never forget when you're in the dungeon, what that felt like, what that looked like. And everything from there is just the grace of God working in your life to bring success. The third danger of your success story is that you miss the purpose of the crisis. God's trying to shape your character. God's trying to teach you a particular lesson, and that lesson can become a message that could change the world. But once the crisis is over, you're quickly relieved and move on. You never learnt the lesson that God was trying to bring to you. You're relieved that the crisis is over, but you're unchanged. You've gained, but you didn't learn anything from the pain. This is a foolish thing to miss. You endured, but you didn't listen. You got through, but you didn't learn something and become wise. You had a breakthrough, but now no one else can receive blessing or mentorship or help from your breakthrough because you've forgotten. You've forgotten what God was doing. When you rise to the top, acknowledge Him. Joseph acknowledges, I cannot interpret your dream, but God who knows all things can interpret it for you. Breakthrough and success must be a step in your destiny, but not the end destination. When the crisis is over, you haven't arrived. It's just a level. It's just a layer. It's just a season. It's just the leg of the journey. A wise person looks for the next challenge. A mature Christian that's got their faith in God even looks for the next bit of pain and suffering, because that's going to produce the next bit of glory in us. Suffering only endures for a short time, but the glory that's revealed within. The man or woman of God wants the next challenge, becomes comfortable with the pain, becomes comfortable with the wrestle with God, the challenge of discipleship, the challenge to grow even more. You know, many of us in our 30s, our 40s, we've grown up in the church, we've been discipled, we've done some things for God, we've served, but the danger, the temptation is that we plateau. We've got somewhere now, we've got some kids now, we've got a job now, but that wasn't meant to be the end. You weren't meant to just overcome the challenge of marriage and becoming a parent and getting a job. No, these things are just building a platform for God to do something greater. Don't get lulled into a sense of I've made it or I've arrived at the destination. God's mindset is that all people can be a success story. In God, it's not an option. Failure is not an option. God never looks at pain as failure. He never looks at error as failure. God never looks at your struggle and wrestle and your doubts as failure. All of it God sees as a preparation for something great. All of the discipline that He brings upon our life, the character-forming opportunities that this world and this life provides for us, none of it's a failure to God. Even if you break through and you become a success story and forget God, still in God's mind, failure is not possible. He still wants to work in our heart if it's prideful. He still wants to work in our heart if we resent Him and we resent others and we resent ourselves. God is always working overtime in His loving kindness to draw us to repentance, to draw us into transformation, to make us a great success. There's always success around the corner in God. There's always breakthrough for those that trust in God. There's always His good, pleasing, and perfect will for those that allow Him to work all things together for good. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you're enjoying this little series looking at Joseph. Help us get the message out by liking this, subscribing to the YouTube channel, also sharing this video with anyone that you can, because God has great things to say.